Of course, all of this serves to ratchet up pressure on President Obama and the United States to act. But why America, and what are the pitfalls if America does act more aggressively? For that, I turn to Nina Khrushcheva. She's a professor of international affairs at the New School and the great-granddaughter of Soviet Premier Nikita Khruschev. And Congressman Adam Schiff of California, who has defended the president's approach on this. I'll start with you, Congressman. President Obama is, as we mentioned, weathering a new round of flack for not being more aggressive on a whole range of foreign policy challenges, actually, including this crisis in Ukraine. Just take a listen to David Brooks on Meet the Press yesterday talking about this.
Let's face it, Obama, whether deservedly or not, does have a, I'll say it crudely, but a manhood problem in the Middle East. Is he tough enough to stand up to somebody like Assad, somebody like Putin? I think a lot of the rap is unfair, but certainly in the Middle East, there's an assumption he's not tough.
It's quite a statement. Obviously, in Syria, as he's talking about, one can understand where that reputation may come from, since there was a concerted push for intervention, and then that was dropped. But in Ukraine, where he's just been circumspect from the start, do you think that reputation is really earned?
No, I don't think so. Look, I think the president wanted to give Russia a chance to de-escalate, to test Russia's intentions. Unfortunately, it looks like Russia wants to continue to infiltrate, agitate, and deceive the world about what it's doing in Ukraine. So it may be very necessary for the administration, I think, to step up sanctions. The big challenge there is not the administration. The challenge is getting Europe on board, because the sanctions will be much more deeply felt in Europe. But I do think it's going to ultimately be necessary. Russia doesn't show really any intention to pull back its green men, these special forces that have infiltrated Ukraine and are organizing a lot of the agitation there. So I think further sanctions are going to be necessary. I think the administration will begin sharing intelligence with, and I think they should. But look, I think the president didn't want to turn this into World War III, and that's very wise. At the same time, it looks like Russia's showing no signs of backing down.
There's certainly a lot of arguments for caution here. There are a lot of complex issues to be embroiled. And let's go to you on that very question, Nina. Do you think that the ambition out of Russia at this point is all-out invasion, knowing the history as you do, knowing it both personally and teaching it?
I don't think so. I think the all-out invasion is not in Putin's interest, because he pretends or wants to be the world statesman. He wants to be listened to. He wants to be great. And if he really takes Ukraine as a country, which I don't think he can, just because it's too much of a piece of land and too close to Europe to take it over. So his job, and we've discussed it on this show, is that his job is to make sure that the Kyiv government now, the pro-Western government, appears very weak, and it already does, and also show that the West is absolutely incapable to keep the promises. And Putin is a tough man, says what he does, stands by his word, and punishes the West by not abiding to its own word.
It's the unfortunate condition of so much of foreign policy that caution gets one burned. We'll see if that ends up happening to the president here. Congressman, right now, Press Secretary Jay Carney is giving the White House briefing, and he actually urged Russia to use its influence to pressure those paramilitary groups to disarm. Obviously, strikingly at odds with all the evidence we have that Russia is behind those paramilitary groups. But take a listen to what the response on the Hill has been to this line of arguing. Senator Bob Corker talked about this just yesterday.
I think we need to step on out and do the things that we threatened, because I don't think Putin will respond to anything else other than us overtly doing the things that we've laid out.
So clearly this tact of requesting Russia to use its influence in a positive way is deemed insufficient by some elements on the Hill. What do you say to that kind of a response?
Well, look, it does certainly seem like Russia is not backing away from its secret campaign to destabilize the country, and I think its ultimate goal is to try to prevent a meaningful election next month throughout all of Ukraine, which would give more legitimacy to the Kiev government. So, you know, it is going to be tough to stop that agitation. I think sanctions are probably the best answer to that. But in terms of American military support in Ukraine, Ukraine is in such a weak position militarily. That's not going to slow down Russia one heartbeat if Russia chooses to invade. What may slow down Russia is the idea of sector-wide sanctions. And that's why I really think we need to try to line up Europe behind sanctions on their banking industry, their mining industry, their energy industry. That may be an adequate deterrent, not to the continued destabilization program, but to overt Russian invasion.
And we are starting to see some signs of that economic impact, the ruble in free fall, a lot of capital flight out of Russia. Remains to be seen whether that'll be persuasive. Nina, tell me, do you think that any of the relationship between the United States and Russia is salvageable in the short term?
I think actually the Ukrainian crisis is going to last for a really long time. I think Putin has done enough damage for maybe even decades to come. I think the United States really needs to go back to 1946, to George Kennan, the great American diplomat, and really start designing or explaining the sources of, Kennan explained the sources of Soviet conduct. Somebody has to design the sources of Russian conduct and see how you psychologically, politically, internationally deal with Vladimir Putin, which has become a really serious menace, not just in the words of Barack Obama, regional power. And I think sanctions, so the markets really will teach them how to not to use military force, because if ruble falls further and if Russian economy falls further, then they would be for Putin, and his popularity may tumble down.
And as Congressman Schiff points out, the bottom line often is what speaks most powerfully. All right, thank you both of you, Professor Nina Khruschev.